by two extremely special guests, the Honourable Michael Kirby, AC, CMG, and Johan van Vloten. Michael Kirby, of course, is a very accomplished lawyer, jurist, former judge of the High Court of Australia from 1996 till 2009, a former Chancellor of Macquarie University, and most recently led the UN Commission of Inquiry into North Korea. Michael, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having us.
And while I'm very excited to have you here, I'm more excited to have Johan here, because in your 48 years of being together, this is your first ever joint interview.
Who knows where it may go?
I'm sure it won't be. And Johan, you've been by Michael's side now for almost 50 years.
That's right.
And you've been a spouse mostly out of the limelight, although you have increased the profile significantly of one charity called Ankali. Can you tell us a bit about Ankali?
This is a charity to look after people with AIDS, so for HIV affected. And I've done that for 7 years.
Yeah, and you go and mentor people there?
You mentor people and keep them basically happier than if they were left to their own devices.
Yeah, fantastic. And then you're originally from the Netherlands, yeah? So where does your story begin?
In the Netherlands, and I was born in The Hague. Lived most of my life in Sydney and Dordrecht, from which I migrated to Australia, basically because of the climate. In Holland it is always a bit...
So you didn't come out here for the liberty and freedoms that we know in Australia?
I took that for granted. I wasn't counting on that, but that was a bonus, yeah.
So growing up, your childhood, that was in post-war? You were born during the war, yeah?
No, before the war,
Before
1939.
Okay.
And
you have
there
memories?
were glimpses, yes, of bombardments in 1944 in Nijmegen, unfortunately done by the Americans.
Yeah.
That was an unfortunate incident where they dropped the bombs before, on return thinking that they were still above Germany.
Oh, and you were there at the time?
I was there at the time, yes.
And that's one of your earliest memories, is?
That was, yes.
Wow. And then after the war, was a difficult period, or it was shortages, or?
There was poverty and restrictions. It was a different life, but you don't miss, compared to the material world of now. It was much more simpler, and it was not too bad. No, it was good.
Okay. Yeah, great. And then where did you two meet?
Well, that was a long while after that. We met in 1969, on February the 11th, 1969. We remember it ever so well.
February the 11th, 1969, yeah. Wow.
It's almost Valentine's Day, but thank God it wasn't Valentine's Day. A bit corny.
And it was in Australia, you were? Or?
In Australia, yes. So that was 6 years after I had migrated. And
So Johan was searching around for somebody, and I was searching around, and then lo and behold, we went to the Rex Hotel, which was one of the relatively few gay bars in Sydney at the time, and we met up then. And it was a great blessing in my life, a great blessing, and I'm very lucky that I met Johan.
And 1969, if I'm not mistaken, actually being gay was still illegal at that time in New South Wales, wasn't it?
It was not legal, or it was more or less ignored. If you didn't break the rules, then
you were okay.
We never hidden the fact that we lived together with neighbours.
Right.
And that all knew.
But we had to be super discreet. And for example, I would ring Johan and I would let it dial, and then I would put the phone down, and then I'd dial again, and that was a signal to him that I was on the other end of the phone, so he could pick it up in order not to lead any colleagues or others to know that he was there. That was what was forced on you at that time.
Can you explain that a bit more? What do you mean by letting colleagues know that you were there?
Well, that's basically to avoid that I was pushing myself in the limelight, and so it was don't ask, don't tell, basically practice.
In practice, it was don't ask, don't tell.
Yes.
Although I've looking through the history of discrimination in against gay and lesbian people, it wasn't until I believe 1949 that Victoria abolished the death penalty on the statute books for people who...
Yes, well, we didn't actually feel threatened that we were going to be hanged for
right
getting together. In fact,
so the statute. So what was on the law? The law said one thing, but in practice, you felt that within your sort of trusted circles, you could live, albeit discreetly, but in a way that...
Discretion was the word.
Yeah, right.
And basically the police left the venues alone. One doesn't know whether some money passed hands for this, but the fact is that gays were persecuted, but persecuted ever so discreetly, and if they kept their heads down and didn't assert the fact that they were gay, they weren't really upsetting people, because it was the fact that they existed that people didn't want to know about. And there are still some people who don't want to know about it. Well, that's over, and people have just got to get used to the fact that there are these variations in the human species, and we're part of it.
Yeah, and of course we have a postal ballot, of course subject to a High Court challenge, which I won't ask your legal opinion on because that would potentially be inappropriate. But we will. There's also been, of course, a previous move to have a compulsory plebiscite, which was defeated in the Senate. And Michael, you spoke very forcefully against that, which I think held a lot of sway with the crossbenchers, who in particular quoted your views as to determining why they decided to vote that down. Why was that a bad idea?
We had only really once before had a plebiscite as a prelude to federal legislation, and that was in 1916 and 17, when the proposal for overseas compulsory military service arose, and they were both defeated, both of those plebiscites, and it was never tried again. And never before, in the case of enlarging the freedoms and equality of minorities, Aboriginals and white and Asian Australians and people with disabilities, never had we had a plebiscite as a prelude to it. It had never been required that it go out into the streets. It was decided in Parliament. And so I thought this was an exception. It was an exception to our representative democracy, and it was a discrimination against gays. And I didn't think that was a good precedent, and I didn't think it was just that it was happening to Johan and me. So I spoke up, and a lot of people and all parties thought it was not a good idea, and eventually it was knocked on the head in the Senate, and a very good thing too.
And now we have a postal survey, a non-binding, non-representative, perhaps statistically unreliable event. And Johan, I think in particular, you had previously asserted, or maybe Michael had said so on your behalf, that you were considering boycotting this.
That goes basically back to the Netherlands. Don't forget, the Netherlands wasn't always that progressive. So I think before migration, I had a choice: declare my homosexuality and didn't have to do my service in the military and migrate sooner. But then it would have been noted on your paper, and any future employer, plus a migration move, might have been rejected on the basis of my sexuality.
So hang on. So back in the 1960s, there was compulsory military service in the Netherlands,
and in Australia, by the way, we had national service in Australia, and they had similar in the Netherlands, and everybody had to do it. I was postponed because of my university studies, but Johan had to do it and did it, and was a very handsome soldier, I might say.
I'm sure. I think we've probably got some photos of that of those times.
I think we've suppressed it.
So you could get out of military service by declaring yourself to be gay?
Yes. But that was seen as a slight of a disorder, and so it was then put against your name, and it might be coming to bite you later on in life.
Okay.
And so I did my military service, and then as soon as that was over, I migrated.
Right. And the boycott. So the original idea that this is something that we should boycott.
Well, that was on that principle that if I tell the government everything, and it wouldn't necessarily be in my favour to declare that. And so I think this postal vote, or whatever you want to call it, is basically junk mail, to be honest. It's not binding on either side, and it is just looking into my life, my private life, and other people to make a judgment on that. And I don't want that.
So the first response when presented with a non-binding invasion, if you like, into your privacy is to say, no, hang on, that's none of your business.
None of my... yes, that's why I was very much against it.
The question on everyone's lips at the moment is, have you changed your mind?
Yes, I have changed my mind.
You've changed your mind.
I think even if the yes vote is respectable, then it is certainly for others people to consider. So if you boycotted or you didn't vote, or you voted no, then you would give your opponents a free kick. And so I decided not to do that and vote.
So the view from Johan once was boycott, but now it's
vote and get on the bandwagon. We are hopeful that it is a yes vote, but then Brixton and Mrs. Clinton proved that it sometimes worked the other way. But I hope that Australians give us a fair go, and that's what it's always been in this country, and I hope that is the case in this case, that it should be upheld, it should be voted yes.
So you'll be voting yes, and you'll be encouraging everybody else to get out there and vote as well.
That's it.
Oh, great. 48 years together, what I was struck by was, firstly, congratulations, because not only have you been...
Commiserations?
Commiserations.
It's a great blessing. I mean, in the internet this morning, it showed people who are married have better health, they have better mental health. It's good for people, and you have to have a really strong argument to say people should not be able to get married if they're adults and they want to get married. In 24 countries, gays can do that, and they're countries with a population of 760 million people. Australia is really the last of the Western democracies that doesn't have this. We've made a great big welter of it, and it's been going on for too long. We should get it over and done with. Hopefully it will not go to a so-called postal survey, but if it does, I think it's the duty of everybody who believes in freedom and equality to get out there and vote. So we have backflipped. We have changed our mind. We've done that because the circumstances have changed. The Senate knocked the plebiscite on the head, and instead of simply accepting that fact of a vote in Parliament, the government has gone ahead with this non-binding, non-compulsory, unscientific poll, and it is not a satisfactory way to go. It's discriminatory. It should not happen. It should never happen again, and the way we can make sure of that is all Australians who love equality and freedom will go out and they will make sure that their ballot gets into the mail and that it is yes for marriage equality.
In terms of changing minds, that seems to be a big flavour in this debate. There's a lot of people who seem to have changed their mind over the last few years on this, including the Labor Party, including, for example, Penny Wong on things like this. Certainly the surveys that we look at suggest that a lot more people today are in favour of same-sex marriage than were even sort of 5 years ago. And I think one of the things that a lot of people have said is that this postal survey actually presents a third option for people that may not be there in a sort of compulsory plebiscite, which is you can either vote yes or you can vote no, but there's a middle option for people who may not necessarily be entirely comfortable yet with same-sex marriage, but who have seen their own views evolve, and they may not necessarily want to vote no to something where their mind has shifted. So I know a number of people who are talking to, say, their parents or their grandparents or their aunties and uncles, and saying, look, you may not be at a position to yet vote yes, but maybe you should just not vote at all if you're not quite sure. What's your view on that?
Yes, that is a good thing to have expressed that way, because if you vote, if you don't vote, then at least you don't hurt anyone. You can still wait for other people to come around, because this will be discussed for a long time, because the election itself is about 6 or 7 weeks running. So there will be a lot of input, and so people can't, even if they decide now that they don't participate or vote the other way or vote, there will be influence. And if the yes vote is getting momentum, then it can be having people on board. And I think that's very important. That's why I've changed my mind. People like Tony Abbott's sister, very strong, Ian Thorpe coming out and jumping on the bandwagon. Very good.
I think in Australia, when I was growing up, and even when Johan arrived, we had really serious prejudice against people of different races. We had White Australia until 1966, so that's about the time that Johan arrived. And how did we change? How did we get different? And I think we got different because we began to meet Asian people. We began to meet people who are African Australians. We began to meet people of different races and different backgrounds and cultures, and we found that they were just like us. There were good people and there were boring people amongst them. But and I think it's true also about gays, and that's why Johan insisted that we should be open about our sexual orientation, and why I decided that we should do that under a little bit of thumbscrew pressure from Johan. But and this is why we're here today. First, to show that it is an unthreatening thing. People can have loving and supportive relationships for very long times, gay or straight. It does happen, and it is a wonderful thing and good for people's health. But second, it's not threatening to others. It doesn't affect other people's relationships. Lots of countries have now done it. We're dragging the chain, and it's something where if you are kind, if you recognise your fellow citizens, some of whom are LGBT, then you should reach out and respect them and respect their legal rights and make sure they have equal rights to others. And I hope that will happen.
Yeah, and recognising that having a vote to say vote no is a very big step about denying
the future generation, because it's going to happen. If it's not happening under this government, maybe on the next, but certainly it's going to happen, and so it's only postponing it.
Yeah, and it's a very big step, isn't it, to deny the same rights that you enjoy to other Australians.
It's the last herd of discrimination.
Yeah, certainly we've been very involved in the recent disability debate at AI Media about having a more inclusive disability system and a properly funded disability system where people with disability are treated with respect and have the choice to participate in life through the National Disability Insurance Scheme. And I think people with disability again were very much ignored, and along with people who were black, Aboriginal, or women even who didn't have the vote for a long time and certainly couldn't open a bank account on their own if they were married until fairly recently, historically, then this does seem to be like another step towards progress.
It's a step we're taking a long time getting to in Australia.
Well, yes, 48 years of being together. And I was very struck by one of the very first things that you two did together back in, I believe, you met in 1969, and there was somewhat of a road trip in 1970. Can you tell us a bit about that?
We went from Australia, we bought a second-hand combi, shipped it to Singapore, drove the whole Malaysian peninsula, shipped it again to Thailand, and then we shipped it again to India, and then we meandered off to Europe.
You took a combi from Sydney to London.
We drove basically from Sydney to London, except for these.
Well, you kindly say we drove it, but you drove it, because I've never learned to drive.
You've never learned to drive?
Never learned to drive, no. Soon after I met Johan, I got a Commonwealth car, so everybody should have a Commonwealth car. But Johan was the driver. He did it 3 times, back and forth. A lot of Australians did it in those days. It was quite a common thing for young Australians to get into a combi and drive overland. And we both agree it was one of the most wonderful things we did in our lives.
And it also reinforced our love or affection, because if you can live more than a year in a combi, then living in a house is so much easier.
And it's probably a bit cheaper than affording a deposit these days, I would think.
I think we managed to live on about $20 a day.
$20 a day on a and you would have gone through some countries, just thinking of the map, that were not very and remain not very conducive to homosexuality. What was your travelling story?
Well, we didn't. Again, it was like back in Australia. If you didn't frighten horses in the street, then people wouldn't react. And also, if you look at the pictures which were just shown on television, we were just 2 young mates.
Two young mates in a combi van.
That's right.
Yeah.
So that was more or less acceptable.
Were there any tricky bits? Where was the...
Not on the sexuality issue, but there were dangerous places. Afghanistan, even then, was a somewhat dangerous place. But we basically kept to ourselves, and it was a great adventure. It was Johan's idea. I would never have had such an imaginative idea as a lawyer, and we did it. And it was a great experience. We could read, we read poetry. He knows lots of English poems, and we really had a wonderful time. And if you can last a year, and certainly 2 years in a combi, then you are set up for life.
Same combi? The combi
No, different combi. One Australian combi,
yeah,
and the other one was bought in Europe.
Oh, because that was for your second trip, yes.
Second trip.
So having
that was a luxury combi. That was all mod cons.
And where was the second trip?
That was from the makers of the combi in Germany, Hanover, to Sri Lanka.
To Sri Lanka.
And then back.
And back. So you went from Germany to Sri Lanka and back. So you spent 2 years in 2 separate combis.
Yes.
And that set you up well for 48 years of all but marriage.
That's it. The last piece of paper is still missing.
That last piece of paper is still missing. And look, Michael, one of the arguments that the opponents of this marriage reform have used has been that it might infringe freedom of speech and freedom of religion. Have you found, what's been your experience in terms of the current debate in terms of freedom of speech?
Well, I think it's a bit rich for people to be saying that we, who have been suppressed and required to be silent about our identity and about matters which are intimate and personal in our lives, and pretend for years that we were different from what we were. I think it's a bit rich for these people who've or whose predecessors forced that on us, to be saying we're trying to suppress freedom. We want to encourage freedom and freedom of speech. But this week, indeed this Friday, I was invited to go to a Catholic college, and I was concerned at recent statements by the Archbishop of Sydney, so I drew to the attention of the students who'd invited me there and said they should check it out with the principal, and the principal rang me up and said, well, I think in light of the Archbishop's statement, thank you but no thank you, we're not going to invite you. So free speech is in the eye of the beholder, and I think a bit of free speech on all sides and a bit of free speech in schools so that the issue of sexuality can be addressed, and so that the young boy or girl in an Australian school, whatever its type, whether it's a public school or religious or private school, should not feel alone, as I felt alone. I felt alone, and that is not a good thing for young people, and it's cruel and it's too much pressure. So free speech, I'm for free speech, but I think free speech means free speech on the part
should
of
cut
the...
both ways.
Yes, exactly. Free speech on the part of religious organisations as well.
So you've actually been disinvited from going to a Catholic school.
Yes.
Because of the fear that you might express a view that was different to that of the of the Catholic Church.
Well, I didn't want to get the students who'd invited me into trouble, and I didn't want to get myself embarrassed by going there and saying something and being attacked, as did happen when I went years ago to Riverview College. I was criticised. We sent our child to get a Catholic upbringing, and we don't want people like you coming in and telling him about gays. So I thought I should bring it to the notice of the principal, and then he disinvited me. Okay, that's hurtful, but these things happen. But one day we will all be equal. One day we will all be respected for our dignity and basic rights and our civil rights, including the right to marriage.
So it would seem that the freedom of speech does not extend to a requirement to, say, present both sides of this debate within certain parts of the Catholic Church. But
well, that's only one school on one occasion, and many Catholic institutions. I'm thinking of the Catholic hospitals and their foremost work in the struggle against HIV. I honour and respect them. But we've all got to become a little bit more respectful and a little bit kinder to each other and listen to our stories. And as with White Australia, that, I think, will change our Australian attitudes and our prejudices.
And of course, I think some element of freedom of speech has come up in the last 24 hours, and perhaps that's the ability to say stuff like "stop the fags" as part of this debate. It sounds awfully like "stop the Jews" or "stop the niggers" to me.
Yes, again, though, that is a very small group of crazy people, and I don't think that represents the ordinary Australians' view, including ordinary Australians who are against marriage equality or marriage for gays at this stage. I don't think that is the spirit of the times, but whilst there is a denial of a basic civil right which is made by a law of the federal parliament of this country, a secular parliament, that is not a good thing, and that should be changed, and soon.
Michael Kirby, Johan van Vloten, thank you very much for joining me today, and thank you very much for coming on board to encourage everybody to get out there and vote. One thing I'd like to say is that I have had the privilege of marrying my now husband, Marcus, in Germany 6 years ago, and it was the best day of my life, and it's made an enormous difference to me, to the quality of our relationship, and the fact that we've been able to celebrate with friends and family in a way that other people take for granted. And I do hope that you both will see that day, and many millions of Australians as well hopefully will support that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Tony.